Hello and welcome everybody to today's Teradata LinkedIn Live series. Today's topic is Reach, how to make 5G pay using data and analytics to generate new revenue streams. Reach, by the way, is an entire series of curated content, telco specific. So we will have and already had hybrid events. We had roundtables. Now we're here in LinkedIn and we're going all the way back to another hybrid event. So if you're interested in learning more about the topic, follow Teradata, follow us right here on LinkedIn, and watch out for more Reach event invitations. My name, by the way, is Alexander Corey, and I will be the moderator and host for today's session. And before I now introduce the other three people you see on the screen here with me, my today's guests, I would love to know about you in the audience. Where are you from? I myself am dialing in from Munich today, and I'm curious to find out who's the audience out there. So please use the chat right here next to the LinkedIn picture. Use the chat and let us know where you're from. I'm totally curious to find out who you are. Speaking of the chat, we want to start a dialogue about 5G and monetizing 5G today. We're not going to solve it on this call. So please let's start using the chat to write us your questions. My colleague Felix is in the chat, and he will make sure to route all of the questions that you are posting there right here into the Munich Broadcasting Studio so that we can address them with the three speakers that we have here today. And with that, let's dive in right into the topic. 5G, big topic. Everybody in telco seems to be talking about 5G these days. And telcos, it seems, are more than ever transforming into actual data-led companies. And indeed, 5G is opening a wide range for new services, and those will actually help us monetize 5G. But are telcos already leveraging it to the fullest? And I do, for example, see location-based services, but what about other services? What about the usage of data? How does that come in and help us leverage 5G and monetize 5G in the end? So we are more than happy to have such great guests here today who will discuss this topic with us. And like I said, you guys in the audience, we count on you. This is going to be a live session for a reason. We want you to post your questions so that we can discuss them. And with that, let me introduce you to the guests I have on today's LinkedIn Live session in the order of appearance. There is Mark Nixon, the worldwide lead of the telecommunications industry consulting practice here at Teradata. Hi, Mark. Good to see you. Hello. Then we have David Jerem, the Director of Ecosystem Architecture EMEA at Teradata. Hey, David. Again, good to see you. And last but not least, we have Niladri Dutta, who is the Global Director and Head of AI Innovation, Data Strategy, and Tech Sales at the Managed Services IT Business Unit at Ericsson. Hey, Niladri. So good to see you. I hear that the three of you have prepared a couple of slides. And for you in the audience, we will show a couple of slides to, let's say, set the scene a little bit. And we will, and my guests will share a lot of knowledge and a lot of ideas how to monetize 5G. And while they're presenting, please free to start posting your questions. We will take your questions, present a little, take your questions, and we want to start a huge dialogue. And with that, I'm looking forward to what Mark, David, and Niladri have prepared, and would hand it over to Mark.
Hey, thanks, Alex. Lovely to meet everybody, and it's great to be sharing some perspectives, some thoughts, some ideas today with the aim to try and really start a dialogue. As Alex alluded to, in 45 minutes to an hour, can we cover everything that everybody's thinking about 5G? Probably not, but hopefully what we'll do is plant some seeds, some ideas, some opinions, and we can start a really interactive dialogue. So I'm calling in from the UK, as you may have guessed from my accent. So, but let's kick off. I'm going to go back in time a little bit, actually. The hype around 5G and now even 6G has been coming for a while. But I want to go back in time and look at this whole transformation, which is essentially what the industry is going through. And by the time, if we can look back, by the time the pandemic hit, the telecoms industry had been managing over a decade of disruptions, which were driving really challenging business conditions. And the slide that you can see today really brings that home in terms of, if we look back in 2010 and look at the size of the digital economy, connectivity was probably the largest contributor. We were looking at an economy around $3 trillion. If we jump forward to 2020, digital services has clearly outperformed the other pillars and created, and that digital economy has doubled to sort of over $6 trillion. The key metric, though, is that telcos captured 2% growth, despite enabling and connecting the whole world, as we saw during the pandemic and beyond. 2% is not really where the telcos want to be. And there's some reasons behind that. There's been customer back disruption in which digital native companies like Uber and Netflix that we all use set a new standard for what we call seamless online experiences, forcing the operator to redefine the way that they interact with their customers. There's been business model disruption with technology such as AI, big data, Internet of Things, redefining service delivery and the way that we capture value in the business. And we've seen some new entrant disruption. You'd have thought back in 2009 when WhatsApp was launched that it would disrupt the whole global messaging industry, and it's now been purchased by Meta. So with all of that increased competition with the traditional players, new entrants, this is a real challenging time for the telcos. So the need to transform is clear. But let's look at what that means and how data analytics it can help to drive a positive transformation. So we see an opportunity for telcos to digitally transform and return to stronger growth with a new operating model. And we call that journey from telco to data company. And the first observation is that the transformation is wide and covers every aspect of the telco. From customer engagement journeys that require not only a new way of engaging with customers, but a brand new approach to channels and how they're managed. The operations journey involves the enormous challenge of changing the culture of the organization, bringing in new skills, as well as the challenge of preparing the company to adopt these new business models. Technology journeys, including infrastructure transformation from 4 to 5G, from hardware to software, from NFV, SDN, security. And all of these journeys are really there to try and open up the network and the systems platform via APIs to third parties. So we see both opportunity and challenges for the industry as 5G becomes more ubiquitous and data-led strategies become more prevalent. But let's not forget, many of the world's top telecoms companies and mobile network operators are already using and realizing the benefits of data and analytics across a variety of use cases. Teradata has been working with our telco customers for 30 plus years globally, and we've seen the impact of data analytics on customer services and customer care with proactive customer retention activities, increased understanding of the customer complaints, the sentiment that we can capture, and the more dynamism in terms of how can we predict what's happening within the network to be able to improve those experiences. Sales and marketing, understanding the customer usage behavior and individual experiences. How do we address churn of what's happening with those customer journeys? We work with finance around revenue assurance and the intelligence of how we detect fraud and reduce fraud. And we also look now at a multi-dimensional profitability in terms of every asset that telco has, and how do we turn that into something that's meaningful, that drives the kind of financial returns that they would expect. And then, of course, networks and technology, prioritizing the rollout and investment planning. Where do we put those new 5G sites? Where are our high-value customers? Where do we need to deliver new real-time services such as on-demand video? But however, after years of anticipation, 5G networks are now going live around the world. There are 400 plus operators in 135 countries with around about 500 million connections, and the promise to unlock a tremendous amount of new business opportunities for telcos. So let's look at some of those attributes and the opportunities that we think and that we're seeing currently. So as I touched upon, 5G will bring significant opportunities, but also new challenges in terms of increased complexity as we add billions of new devices beyond handsets, such as IoT sensors, cameras, gaming. Essentially, everything that can be connected, we believe, will be connected. So the 5G rollouts require thousands of new microsites to facilitate the high speed, low latency, increased scale, and the security that the architecture will bring. I believe the key to success will be the ability to orchestrate the new agile networks and experiences end to end. To do this effectively, we believe it requires new business and operating models that are enabled and accelerated by the utilization of advanced data analytics. So when we look at the move towards standalone in 5G with closed-loop automated architectures, inherent data-enabled predictive models for a zero-touch capability. So one of the key things for me as well, before I pass over to David, is that even the standards bodies have recognized the importance and critical nature of data analytics in getting this 5G train on the track, and then also utilizing those attributes of 5G to go beyond the traditional build and connect into new services in Industry 4.0 and industrial IoT. And I think we're going to talk throughout this session about those key themes of partnerships, openness, agility. So I'm going to pass over now to David, who I think is going to provide you a little bit more data in terms of insights in terms of how data analytics can drive this capability. Thank you.
Super, Mark. Thank you so much. So your point is data is absolutely crucial, and that's why we have David here, who can now guide us through a couple more thoughts around this. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Mark. So I think there's three key areas that operators are going to really need to focus on if they're going to be successful in really getting the value in terms of monetizing 5G. So historically, telcos have been very good at collecting huge amounts of data, but much of that data is still being in silos, which really restricts some of its real value to the operator. And if we think about monetizing 5G, that really means building an increasing level of customer intimacy. And that means we really need to think about how we can radically overhaul some of our data management capabilities of telcos. And so we need to shift from this collecting focus to much more of a connecting mindset, combining network experience with the network data, with customer data, and increasingly with partner data, as well as the customer behavioral data. And we need to be able to build these enhanced customer profiles or enhanced device profiles, so we really understand what's happened in the past, what's happening now, and more importantly, be able to predict what needs to happen right next to this next moment. And so we need to be able to combine deep behavioral data, typically in a data lake or object store based format, with an optimized and derived customer profile data products, and then combine that with the real-time context we're getting off the network right now. And of course, 5G integration with the NWDAF and so on means we need to be able to do this quickly and efficiently, because we're going to have to meet SLAs. And ultimately, that means we just can't afford to shift huge amounts of data between various different data platforms from one environment to another. And so we need to think about how we bring much more about bringing the applications that we want to deploy in the analytics closer to the data, rather than taking data to the applications. And so this data fabric, where we can bring together data that's maybe stored across different mediums, is really critical, because that allows us to work with batch and streaming, and ultimately support federation across multiple platforms as well. But we need to temper that and think carefully about some of the data gravity aspects and the co-location of data, so we don't have so much friction in terms of accessing data. And that allows us then to break down some of the silos. And of course, we need to also be able to do this securely and ensure we meet the data privacy aspects appropriately as well, in conjunction with that. So once we've managed to collect and, more importantly, connect our data together, we need to then think about how do we exploit that data via analytics. And so the real issue here in terms of 5G is with this massive increase, of order of magnitude increase of potential devices on 5G networks, we need to be able to scale both vertically and horizontally in terms of our analytical capabilities to build new models, to process new data, and so on. And so this means that we need to be able to take and build models, train models on millions of observations and score hundreds or millions or billions of observations in batch mode. We also need to be able to horizontally scale to train tens or hundreds of millions of models on thousands of observations and then score them in near real time, especially via integration to network or partner environments. And this is really essential because organizations are going to have to shift to much more of a hyper segmentation model for targeting 5G related propositions, especially with the partnership models that we're going to see evolving as well. And of course, the whole concept of SLAs and network slicing as well plays an important role here also. And we won't be able to do this without driving a significant reduction in the overhead of preparing data for analytics, a task today which still takes up much of the time in terms of the analytic process. And so we need to address this by pivoting away from the state where many organizations are right now, is every time we have a new model or a new requirement for decisioning or scoring, we take the data and we build another pipeline just to satisfy that use case. And that's not going to scale when it comes to deploying the huge numbers of models that we're going to have to deal with in the future. So that means the analytic feature engineering, building out an enterprise feature store that drives reuse and accelerates time to market become increasingly important. And of course, all the while we're doing the managing the data and processing the data for analytics, we want to be able to use our favorite analytic tools and to pivot quickly when something newer and more shiny comes along. And collecting data and building analytics is nothing if we can't actually get a lot of this into production. So the deployment is critically important, because without that last mile, we're not actually going to be delivering any of the value. So we need to focus much more on automation, probably with data ops and model ops to address some of the data analytics scalability challenges and efficiency requirements we're going to have to address. We need to think about a faster time to market. So we're taking a federated approach to data product development along the lines of data mesh, which is very prevalent in industry right now, helps with agility and the time to market in that regard. And getting models into production via in-database scoring allows real-time scoring via API. We can tie into the network and partners, and this ultimately drives simplification by reducing the number of data platforms and the need for data movement. And finally, we shouldn't forget the organizational impact in terms of needing to rework our customer value management and customer experience management strategies as well. And so we need to expect to see a lot of change in that regard. And so I think when you wrap a lot of these requirements up, you need to really consider the need for a connected data platform that simplifies the data analytic management at scale, minimizing data movement between platforms via an intelligent query fabric. We need to scale that to support the real-time batch data analytic workloads that we're going to see. And we're going to drive innovation via self-service and low-friction data management, all the while using your favorite analytical notebooks and third-party tools. So that's my wrap-up from a technology perspective, and over to you, Niladri, to focus more on the data exploitation.
Thank you, David.
Thanks a lot, and I think it's a privilege to be a part of this, August discussion that we are having today. I'm really looking forward to to the insights that we are all sharing here. Hopefully, it resonates well with the audience, right? So I think Mark and David, wonderful perspectives. It's quite a hard act to follow, given the fact that you've pretty much covered the vision of the operator from a strategist perspective. And I think, David, you beautifully orchestrated what it takes to implement some of those. I would like to, take a step back and, look at it from a demand side and see how and where we have really changed the game. And it's primarily looking at the customer demand dynamics, if I may say so. And if you look at the classic telco versus a modern telco, the genesis of the monoliths being broken down into platform enablement models is predominantly driven by the demand that the customer has today. And 5G is basically an orchestrator of this whole demand. And the entire ecosystem is driven by the telco 2.0 enterprise, or what we call as the digital telco. And I personally think that 5G is, going to be at the heart of this whole transformation. And it's not just for the consumer, but also for the enterprise. And that's the key difference. So 5G is obviously not meant to, deliver higher bandwidths in terms of greater customer satisfaction from a consumer standpoint, but more so because it's looking at the larger ecosystem, it's predominantly going to focus on a B2B market more than a B2C market. So if you look at the whole telecom monoliths being broken down, you'll see at the heart of a traditional customer, there'll always be a service, an organization, and a channel. And that pretty much remains the same. The only nuance is the way services are being delivered and the way services are being orchestrated. and what actually gets defined as a service. And that's where the business model drives as a true imperative to basically enhance this whole digital story and ensure that the next generation customer is looking for something which is more meaningful from the service provider. And in fact, in the telco world, the service provider language will cease to exist. It would be largely an enabler or a technology enablement, as pretty much is acceptable by most telco CXOs. So if we move on and look at it from a perspective of a value chain, right, and see how it fits into from an equipment vendor perspective or the OEM perspective versus the telcos, and then looking at it from a data delivery perspective or an analytics delivery perspective, there are different nuances which one may look into. First of all, it is obviously, and it's going to be delivered as a service, and largely because there is no one size fits all kind of a concept that really works here. I think, David, you spoke about the concept of data mesh. There is obviously the concept of data fabric tied towards the data mesh, which is going to be one of the single most important drivers to ensure that monetization becomes a reality. If you step back and look at the past history, telcos haven't been so successful as far as the monetization story is concerned. And in fact, the only successful story we have in the telco world as far as monetization of data is concerned is location-based services. And that's something which is going to change with the advent of 5G. I think that's going to be a very, very key thing, especially for the telco CIOs and the CTIOs, wherein they look forward to. And when you break 5G into three different segments, I believe primarily the focus is too much given on the enhanced mobile broadband and the ultra low latency. But the reality is, the large part of use cases which we are going to roll out, especially to drive the strategy of monetization, is going to be on the massive IoT bucket. So mostly, if you look at B2B or Industry 4.0 use cases, it's going to be the massive IoT or the Industry 4.0, which obviously is an amalgamation of analytics, automation, and data put together, which is going to drive some of these monetization aspects. I think that's going to be the fundamental shift. Also, it's imperative for us to know what are we talking of if we look at it from a device standpoint. So if you look at it from a typical, strategic initiative, when you look at it from a telco standpoint, how many devices are we talking of? What is the connectivity layer we are talking of? What sits on top of the connectivity in terms of services and applications? So one of the key strategic initiative to make 5G a success story, not just for the CIOs and the CTIOs, it is imperative for the survival of telco to actually monetize the huge amount of data that is being generated as part of this whole 5G bandwagon. And what would be the typical drivers for transformation in terms of deciding whether the data monetization becomes a success story? It's going to be the awareness that gets created. It's going to be a cultural adaptability that is very important, because most of these telcos that we are talking of have been into the markets for decades, right? So it's not easy to transform if you're not a next generation company in today's day and age. And Mark, I think you spoke of disruptive technologies. I think most of these telcos are really averse to disruptive technology. So data monetization can be an adoption towards that disruptive technology. The important aspect here is to identify within the entire telco ecosystem the domain that one needs to pilot to make monetization a success story. If you break the telco landscape, you would obviously have either the front office, the middle office, or the back office, or you may want to look at it from a functional standpoint, where you want to break it down into marketing, sales, product management, backed up by networks, IT, operations, supply chain, finance. It's imperative for us to identify a particular domain, identify where monetization can act as a low hanging fruit. What works for one telco may not be necessarily working for the other. And it's very, very important for the CXO sponsorer to support this as a pilot program, wherein we want to roll out monetization as a successful revenue driver. There are obviously different adoptions of monetization, and I'm going to just quickly throw some light on that. Most telcos are looking to adopt maybe an internal strategy of monetization with regards to 5G, or they're trying to look at maybe a hybrid strategy, which is a mix of internal and external. Largely, the telcos are focused on external strategy. But my suggestion would be, if you're really looking at monetization as a pilot project, it's better to play safe and go for a hybrid approach, where you can basically have amalgamation of best of both the worlds, both from internal strategy adoption as well as external strategy adoption, which essentially means data becomes a cost savings parameter as well as a revenue driving parameter at the same time. That would be my submission.
Thank you so much. So to sum this all up, what we just learned from you, Mark, David, and Niladri, data analytics, that's where the monetization happens, right? And thanks to the audience. I see the first questions coming in, which is great. First question is for you, Mark. We were just talking about analytics is where the monetization happens, but that's an area that's subject to constant change. How do we deal with that?
Well, I think, when we look at this, we've touched upon it, both me, David, and Niladri. I think the key to the monetization at scale is partnerships. And in terms of Industry 4.0, the key to this is what partnerships do we need? So, just briefly, if you touch upon it, there are, organizations that have purchased 5G licenses that are coming from industry such as Bosch and Siemens. You've got the OEMs, the vehicle manufacturers. And I think it's the role of telcos as they transform to choose those partnerships, to become open. As we build and virtualize software into cloud native capability, that opens up new, what I would call co-creation opportunities in those industries. So I think, as Niladri touched on, I think EMBB, yes, that will be an opportunity where we can enhance the personalization of the experiences. But the big opportunity comes from telcos partnering in, for example, we're doing a lot of work now in smart factories. How do we enable robotics and the analytics from a robotic production line to become more efficient, to improve quality of service in terms of predictive maintenance? And that comes from the application, the manufacturer, the telco, and potentially some systems integration. So for me, the key is partner well, be flexible, agile, and bring those capabilities in terms of the beneficiaries in that ecosystem together.
Super. Thank you, Mark. You just mentioned EMBB. We just got a question in around EMBB, URLLC, MMTC. All of these three services have been mentioned for quite some time. The person from the audience says, but how about the market adoption? Can we monetize and collect data, also considering privacy concerns? Is that, Niladri, I see you nodding. Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Actually, I touched upon that during my response as well. I mean, it's a personal perspective, of course, and I believe that when you look at B2C, yes, a large part of this would be driven by EMBB and URLCC to, hyper personalization related use cases that you want to monetize and roll off at a scale. But I see the real opportunity is not in that B2C segment. I see the real opportunity for 5G for commoditization is in the B2B. And for me, it's the massive IoT, which is Industry 4.0. That's the third leg of 5G, if I may want to call it, where I see the maximum opportunity. And as Mark said, it's all about an ecosystem play. So whether you are adopting a sell with or a sell to kind of a strategy, how successfully you want to roll out, what you want to roll out, and most importantly, how much of regulatory obligation you need to have while you want to while you want to monetize some of these data. One of the reasons why telcos haven't been so successful to monetize data, it's not that they haven't been, really thinking of it. The reason is the regulatory obligations that, as a telco, as an industry, we need to oblige. It's not that easy. There has to be a lot of synthesis and anonymization of data that needs to happen. And, mostly the data adoption has to be in a federated way. And to make it more marketable, we need to create a kind of a construct which is acceptable, consumable, and most importantly, easy to implement. And then only it becomes a reality.
Thank you so much. And we have another question that came in about the huge volume of 5G networks. And the question is, couldn't we centrally manage the data analytics and then we could subscribe to such services? Would that be something that is that we could think of doing? David, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. It follows on to what Niladri was saying about how we do the organizational design and people's responsibilities for data across the enterprise. So I think ultimately, this comes back to a data strategy question in terms of, what capabilities do we need to build within the enterprise to support the monetization, the data collection, the analytics, and so on. And I think centrally we should be provisioning some of that infrastructure for reuse by the various teams across the enterprise. But I think trying to do it all, actually building those data products centrally, is just going to be too much of a massive job for anyone to be successful about it. And that's where domain-driven design and the data mesh comes in. So we let those different business teams are responsible for collecting that data and processing and presenting that data, but we apply appropriate level of governance over the top. That means that actually all the different data products that we've got the different departments building can be exposed and reused by the other teams. And then that allows us to then build over the top services on top of that to actually exploit the data and deliver the analytics in collaboration with all the different teams, and more specifically in partners, because partners are going to be a massive play from a 5G perspective as well. And then it comes back to Niladri's point around privacy and security and so on. So there's lot to consider, but I think the key thing is having everyone stand up behind a central data strategy, and then dividing and conquering build out across the organization.
Yeah, you just mentioned data strategy, David, and I have two questions in a row for Niladri here. When Niladri, you think of the usual tier one telco, what would be an adoption strategy for 5G within a classic telco?
So I think fundamentally, I spoke about identification of the domain as a pilot domain where you want to really monetize. One particular aspect to look at would be supply chain, where there are massive opportunities in the entire 5G ecosystem where data explosion is happening, and where you have potential opportunities to basically create unique examples of, or rather use cases which you can actively monetize as low-hanging fruits. The other function can be maybe IT operations, network operations, followed by marketing, so or product management, if I may say so. But it really depends on the adoption of a framework and how mature the data monetization framework is. I'll give you a few perspectives here. So if you look at the data monetization framework per se, it really starts from identification of the data sources within the domain itself. Now, obviously, supply chain domain would have different sources of data as compared to network, IT ops, or product management or marketing. And that's where, the lowest common denominator, as I call it, the data sits, right? And it's also imperative for us to understand the types of data, how well structured, what kind of shape and form, what kind of an internal dependency versus an external dependency the data has, how much of unstructured data are we talking of. And finally, we also need to look at the key factors when we look at the extraction of the data, in terms of whether we are adopting a triangulation technique or a discovery technique or an aggregation technique, depending on the way we are defining the data pipelines. And finally, we are looking at the value contributors in terms of what value are we really going to deliver as part of synthesis of that particular data, or while we anonymize data and want to sell it, right, as a commodity where it generates revenue. Because at the end of the day, if data is not generating an adequate revenue, it is not monetizing, right? And there are two more layers which we want to really focus on in terms of identification of the industry segment, as we call it. Now, that industry segment can be a retail, or maybe a BFSI, or a travel and transport. It depends on what particular industry are we looking at. Of course, a large part of that will also be dependent on identification of the pilot domain, whether it's supply chain or marketing. A large part of marketing and sales data would be cross-industry consumable. But if you look at network ops or IT ops or supply chain, they won't be cross-industry consumable. So what can be monetized and how it can be monetized? And lastly, what's the return on investment in terms of faster ROIs? So while we create this 7 or 6 steps that I've said, they can actually act as layers of defining that whole framework while we embark on that use case orchestration journey.
Thank you so much. So I see so many questions coming in, and thanks for the additional slide, Niladri. You have been talking about data strategy and the adoption. What do you see any challenges just before we skip the slides and go back into the discussion, do you see any challenges when it comes to strategy adoption?
I think the biggest challenge is cultural challenge more than the technology challenge. I think that's something which we need to really be cognizant of. As I said, telcos are not really the next gen organizations. They're trying to be the next gen organization. So, typically you will see a lot of examples from Rakuten, Geo, now with BT changing and, playing the digital game in a big way. And this all echoes to the first point in terms of changing business model because of the change in customer needs, etc. And 5G is basically the driver for us. So monoliths will not exist any longer. They'll cease to exist. They'll not be the pipe kind of connectivity, or this word service provider will cease to exist. So while we say all this good stuff, the important thing is cultural adoption internal to the organization itself, and how much openness is there to basically roll out data monetization as a revenue strategy rather than a cost strategy. I think that's the fundamental challenge that all telcos are fighting with right now.
Thank you so much. I see us all nodding here in the call, so I think we can all agree it is a mindset challenge, much more than it's a technology challenge. There is one more question that came in from the audience, and this one is around the security aspects. And it says, can security aspects be actually a factor when it comes to a fully fledged monetization of 5G? Can it be explored actually as a potential opportunity? And that's something that, David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. That's a really good question. I think it ties into some of the points that Niladri was making just now. I think there's cultural aspects. So when we look at many of the cloud migrations that are happening now, then security, everyone's very concerned and quite rightly around that. But I think the cultural aspect really does mean that we need to move from treating data as something that needs to be highly protected and secured, and really focusing much more on the sharing and exploitation aspects to it. And I think that's, we're probably in for a bit of a tightly governed time until we find our way through some of this stuff. And then I think that we'll really see some of that exploitation take off once we find the happy path regarding security and privacy versus legitimate business use.
Super, thanks.
To add one point, Alex, if it's all right. On that security point that David just highlighted, large part of the security focus, especially on the 5G service orchestration, as far as how I see it, is it's beyond the connectivity layer, and it's looking at applications and services, and that's where security is of prime concern when you're exposing those APIs over cloud native technologies. And that's why this whole application modernization construct comes into play. And it's a very relevant question, because as much as we want to monetize it, we don't want to get too exposed. However, there are specialized solutions now which are absolutely focused on cloud security and API security from a telco standpoint, which is going to be the highlight and the key differential, which will make services like data monetization a reality in the near future.
Yeah, and it brings us back to what's also been mentioned. There is specialists for everything, right? And Mark touched on it at the beginning, saying we need to partner. We need to rely on the specialists and take the sweet spots of the different companies out there and combine it the right way to deliver the best services. Mark, one last question to you, and then we'll slowly have to wrap up. Mark, where would a telco start this journey?
Okay, well, I think telcos have been on the journey for a while. And the challenge for telcos is they're large, heavily regulated, complex organizations that traditionally have been almost tied into long-term product roadmaps. I think the move to virtualization, the adoption of cloud native capability is all around agility. So the agility in the organization to be, more in tune and market ready. And so I think for me, having a clear data strategy that understands the importance of being able to identify, access, manipulate, analyze data in near real time. So we're moving from a proactive to predictive. And that's, in my perspective, I think Niladri touched on it, and David, culturally, we have to be more open, have to be more agile. We need to be, more aware in terms of how we educate ourselves and we utilize that data to be able to make those cultural shifts. I think then we need a data, a strategy that starts to look at moving from cost to a revenue and a value. And I think we also need to ensure that we are partnering more effectively and open to partnerships. I think traditionally IT has been more partner orientated. Telco has been tended to control end-to-end the service they deliver. Now it's an ecosystem platform-based play. So I would start with the strategy, the governance, cultural elements, and then build upon that. But it's a challenge.
Yeah. Thank you for this great, famous last words, Mark. Thank you so much. Niladri, thank you for sharing all of your ideas and preparing those many slides. And David and Mark, I could in fact talk with you about ideas how to monetize 5G forever, but we'll have to wrap it up right now, I'm afraid. I want to thank you for preparing, for coming here, for taking the time. And I also very much want to thank the audience. You've been great routing all of these wonderful questions our way and really turning this into a dialogue. And that's exactly what we want this to be. So I see a lot of connection requests coming in on LinkedIn, and that's exactly what we want you to do. Start connecting with us right here and right now. And moreover, Felix is sharing a link into the chat, because if you're interested in seeing the slides that you were just shown right here, give us your email address via the link that Felix is sharing, and we will come back to you and can share the slides that we have shown. And what we could also do when you want a deeper dive into the topic, write us why you want to meet David and Mark again, and we will come back to you and even arrange a meeting with our two guests here of the day. And with that, point your camera to the screen once more, because we have a QR code coming up where there is a great white paper summing up all of the ideas that we have been talking about. So download that white paper, just get in touch, connect with us, and let's keep on developing and having a dialogue around the 5G topic here. So with that, I want to thank my four guests, or my three guests who have been here, and the many guests out there in the audience. And thanks to everyone, and see you next time, either in a Teradata event or in a LinkedIn Live session. But anyway, we will see each other here in the Teradata channel. So please, please, please follow the corporate channel. See you here, see you at the next event, and let's connect again. See you next time, and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.